Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Now, one of the many reasons that I started recording this podcast was because I got tired of the same old hype circle when following technology or technology trends. And you know what sites I'm talking about. It usually begins hyping a new smartphone, leaked specs, then we've got the release, then you've got the review, and then straight afterwards you're onto the rumours about the next one. But I've always been curious about stepping back from the hype circle and understand how tech is affecting our lives right now and affecting businesses. And sure, this year we've been bombarded with acronyms and buzzwords such as 5G, AR, VR, AI, blockchain, smart contracts, cryptos. But if you're a business leader, what does that mean? And what value does it offer you? How's it going to make the boat go faster, so to speak? And how's it going to wow your customers? These are the questions that most people have. So today, I wanted to take a step back from all those buzzwords and solutions and chat with Dean Bubley, who was disruptive before disruption went mainstream. And Dean is a regular presenter and moderator at conferences, panel debates, roundtables and podcasts for network operators, technology vendors and event organisers. It's a fantastic conversation and we cover a lot of ground, so buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to London here in the UK, where I speak with Dean and together we attempt to diffuse the tech hype. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Dean. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure, thanks, Neil. So I'm Dean Bubley. I'm an industry analyst and futurist. So I primarily cover telecoms and wireless and communications technology and applications. So anything from sort of 5G wireless networks and Wi-Fi through to the future of voice and video and messaging with some bits of AI and blockchain and also sort of policy and regulatory thrown into the mix. And I advise companies that could be technology vendors or network operators or sometimes investors and governments on what's going to happen in the future. And also, perhaps more importantly, what's not going to happen. I have a reputation as being a bit of a curmudgeon, which essentially means that I try to sort of de-spin the hype around some new technologies and services. My Twitter handle is Disruptive Dean, and I've been various sorts of disruptive for a long time, which is why I called my consulting practice Disruptive Analysis.
I love it. And I think we all need that dose of reality now and again. I mean, if we think to artificial intelligence, for example, it promises the world. And of course, what is artificial intelligence and what isn't is a whole other conversation. But anyone that's scrolled down a Facebook feed or a LinkedIn feed will tell you that it's not all it's cracked up to be right here and now, is it?
Well, it's funny. It's not. I mean, at one level you've got the sort of people who believe that we're about to encounter the sort of what's called super intelligence, which can apply across all applications and solve generic problems. But then you also have people who speak to their voice devices. I'm deliberately not saying a certain name beginning in A, in case she lights up from across my room. And half the time you don't get a useful response. And then that's then blended in with the sort of the paranoia of, I see this on my social media all the time. It's like, I'm sure my phone is listening to me, everything I say. I had this conversation with a friend and then a day later I got an advert for something suspiciously similar. It must be spying on me. I'm like, well, to be honest, I'm lucky if I can order a taxi with mine. Let alone have it spend 24/7 listening in and interpreting what I'm talking about through my pocket. Frankly, if Facebook has the ability to monitor 1 billion real-life audio streams simultaneously, they must have hidden a few nuclear reactors away to power the extra data centers that they're not telling people about. It's not happening. All that said, there are uses of AI which are becoming very important. And there's things like machine learning, but often for relatively mundane tasks. It could be, let's say you're a cable operator or a telco, and you've got a certain number of engineers, a certain number of vans, and a certain number of locations, and you use machine learning to work out who to put with what skill sets in what places on what rota, given what you know about the questions people ask and the problems that you get. And if you can do that well, and you feed in 5 years historic data, and you can save 20% of cost or have people more efficiently deployed, that's a great use. I mean, it's not glamorous, but it's that sort of real world problem of how do we automate things? How can we spot patterns and or detect anomalies? We can see that something's about to go wrong before it actually does, because we know the warning signs are, I don't know, the lift doors take longer to close than they did a month ago, or something like that. So I think that we're going to see AI cropping up in this guise of sort of machine learning and deep learning to solve particular point problems. But the sort of the all-seeing, all-thinking, omniscient, omnipresent robot intelligence, I think is a bit of a sci-fi fantasy for now.
Absolutely. Now, one of the reasons I invited you on the show today was a valid comment you made on voice search after listening to a conversation I had recently with Splice Software, why you shouldn't give your brand voice up to Google, Amazon and Apple and co. And since that podcast, I've spoken with Snip CEO Rand Hindi, who is on a mission to destroy the A word, Alexa, because he feels that it is centralising so much of people's personal data, which is becoming increasingly a ripe target for mass surveillance or hacking. So I don't know how much of that is scaremongering and how much of it is actually true. It's a big question, but what are your views on voice search and where we are heading with it?
My views on voice search or voice access to applications is it's suitable for some people, for some applications, for some contexts, some of the time. There are certain things that voice can be very good for, which might be about, I don't know, I go to a new town and say, and I want to find an Irish bar that sells decent Guinness or something like that. So, or it could be please reorder the same tins of tuna I've ordered for the last 6 weeks. So it's a repetitive task where there's limited confusion, where there isn't a need for a visual display, where you're doing it in a fairly quiet environment, where you're speaking with a language and a dialect which is well understood, then it can potentially make sense. But for example, if you're booking a hotel, you want to see some pictures of it. And I suppose in theory, you could ask your phone or PC to say, show me hotels in Barcelona. But frankly, given you're going to need to use a browser or an app to go through and scroll down anyway, you're in the app experience. And so for me, voice is always going to be a partial solution. And I have the same conversation with people who talk about messaging access to companies or brands. If I think about how I interact with, let's say, an airline or my bank or any other large organization, sometimes I have simple queries, sometimes I have complex queries. I do this for different reasons. And so there's a whole set of things that are appropriate to interact with them. It might be via the app, it might be messaging inside the app, it might be SMS, it might be email, it might be through the browser, it might be through a kiosk at the airport. There's a dozen interaction points. And in some of those, voice may well be appropriate. So I might call into British Airways call center to change my flight. And it might be, if it's a simple query, like, I don't know, maybe changing seat or confirm the terminal that you're leaving from, then that can be handled with a voice access. If, on the other hand, I'm trying to rebook a flight with complex routing because, as happened a couple of weeks ago, the hurricane, cancelled flights where I was connecting, then actually I want to speak to a human, ideally whilst looking at a screen showing me all the options. And I don't think that a voice-activated approach would be appropriate for that type of interaction. So I think it's got a time and a place. And the problem is that when you take the view that there are a dozen ways to interact with a company or brand, the power isn't really invested in any one single channel and the technology provider behind it. It's the integration. It's whoever's doing the multi-channel contact center. It's whoever's doing the AI and predictive intelligence layer, which can choose what channel to communicate with someone. And so I'm not sure that sort of Google and Amazon and Apple well, certainly not Apple, are in a position to be that sort of aggregation point. I also think it's going to be tough for sort of independent third parties to take that role as well, because they'll ultimately have to feed into the sort of multi-channel algorithm at some point too.
Just for everyone listening at home, I think it's important to point out that we are recording today's conversation via Skype audio. And I never use video because it cuts down on bandwidth for the recording. Hopefully get a better quality recording as a result of that. But I will admit that although I've made peace with voice search, video conferencing still feels that little bit awkward to me. So, I mean, how do you think the future of voice and video comms is going to look?
Right, that's an interesting question. And again, it's very contextual. There are certain things where a plain old phone call, as we've been doing for 140 years, makes sense. There's other instances, increasingly, where we either want to have a more basic experience, which could be a voice chat function embedded in an app, which doesn't have all the sort of regulatory and behavioral paraphernalia of a phone call. If you think about a phone calls are pretty unnatural. There's you are interrupting someone. You are causing a device to ring. You potentially leave a voicemail they don't want. You have this sort of slightly unnatural negotiation of, oh, hi there, this is Dean. Is this a good time to call? So I think that we're going to have much better choice of user experiences, whether that's for voice, whether that's for video communications, whether it's for messaging or integrated hybrids of all three. So, for example, if you've got a video doorbell, for example, and you have someone come around to deliver a package while you're out, you might want to see them, so video in one direction, but only have audio going the other for you to sort of talk to them. So you might have two-way audio, one-way video, and then connect to an automated lock with a separate CCTV camera so you can see that they leave the package inside the door and then leave. And you might want to have it all recorded and stored on the cloud somewhere. So that would be a communications instance that uses audio and video, but it's not a phone call, it's not a video conference, it's something else. And so I think that one of the challenges is to get people to go beyond this idea of thinking that all communications is either a call or a conference. Those are only two forms of real-time communication interaction. There's dozens, maybe hundreds of other possibilities. It could be that you've got things like baby monitors, a sort of real-time voice, but it's sort of a different style of audio connectivity. You might have an emergency button in a lift. You have various emergency services, push-to-talk functions. You might have video conferencing, which is in a shopping app, where it's actually using the forward-facing camera rather than the face towards your face, because it's looking at stuff that you're buying in store. It might be what's called co-browsing, where you have a virtual shop assistant that tells you whether that particular shirt fits you well or whether they recommend another color. It could be, I don't know, music tuition, where latency is really important and the video should be of your fingers on the guitar strings rather than your face. There's all these sorts of different forms of audio and video that are becoming much more fine-grained and developer-friendly. It's ever easier to create these new forms of communication.
Now, before we started recording this podcast, we were talking about being on the road, 5 a.m. taxis, just to cover an increasing number of events each year. And like many people listening, I often find myself in this... I'll do that again. I often find myself travelling, and my first world problem gripe is not getting any signal on a train. So the grumpy old man in me would sooner have 4G everywhere than 5G just in a major city. But in your opinion, how much of a game changer will 5G connectivity be?
In the short term, not very much at all.
Yeah.
And by short term, I mean 2 to 3 years at least. Initially, 5G will be used either to add capacity to your existing services, which probably means if you're in the center of Seoul or London or Tokyo or Beijing or New York, you will probably find there's additional capacity as you walk through Oxford Circus. in some parts of the world, notably the US and South Korea and maybe others like Turkey and Germany, you will find that there will be some fixed broadband delivered by 5G, so what's called fixed wireless access, which may be cheaper to deploy than fiber or cable. But exactly how well that works, we'll learn in the next few weeks as it starts rolling out. But in terms of the completely new use cases, whether that's the sort of ultra reliable, low latency communications, whether it's a few other approaches, it's going to take a while for all of the bits of the machine to be deployed. So I was at a 5G conference last week, and to actually really get what's called network slicing, where you take the 5G network and have virtual networks running on top of it. So one really high speed one super secure one ultra reliable one. That's going to take another fully 4 or 5 years to get properly deployed, commercialized, and to scale. And in the meantime, the issue you mentioned there of coverage, there are some things in the 5G radio standards that will improve coverage sometimes. It should be able to connect to multiple cell sites simultaneously. It should be a little bit more aware of users having incipient connection problems. But on the other hand, there's other aspects of 5G that might make it worse. Some of the ultra high speeds that are promised in 5G can only be delivered using radio spectrum at higher frequencies. People often talk about 3.5 gigahertz, or there's this term millimeter wave, which is used to mean anything above, technically it's higher, but it's usually used in the industry to refer to 24 or 28 gigahertz frequency spectrum, which has lots and lots of capacity, but very short range and very poor penetration through building walls and even windows. So the idea on the train is there's certain things about 5G which solve some of the problems of coverage on trains, but they bring in new ones. And actually, perhaps the biggest one of all is the return on investment and the economics of it all. In theory, it would be possible to put gigabit 5G broadband everywhere. However, the number of billions of pounds or dollars or euros you'd need to put into that probably wouldn't get recouped by the network operators quickly. So I think the answer is it's going to take a while.
Absolutely. Now, a few years ago, everyone judged their phone contract by the amount of texts and minutes that they got. Of course, those days are long gone now. And data packages now seem to be the big cash cow for telephone companies. But what future strategies and roles do you think we'll see telecommunications playing? And also, how do you think artificial intelligence will, in the end, influence the industry?
Right. So in terms of future roles of, the telecom operators, so let's say the big carriers, the mobile carriers and the fixed and cable guys, there it depends on their focus, organization and resources. Some of them are trying to transform into content companies. So you have a number of big acquisitions of content companies by certain telcos. Some are trying to transform themselves more into being software players, where they're perhaps developing some of their own full technology stack and either want to sell that software to enterprises or to even to other service providers. And some are more focused on the sort of the building big fast networks which other people can then use. So I think it depends where you are in the world and a given operator what their financial resources are, and also that there's this concept of agility, and whether it's on the technical side, but perhaps even more so on the human side. A lot of people in telecom operators have come from a background where they knew what the product was. It was, as you say, phone calls or text messages, and more recently data. And clearly they're having to contend with an environment where, firstly, the capital expenditure costs are still going up despite virtualization of networks, but also where there's lots more ways to solve any problem. There's a fragmentation of, we talked already about the voice and video fragmentation experience. We don't have to rely on phone calls. We have 100 applications which do exactly what we want. We're also going to see specialization into different industries, and we're starting to see some telecom companies focus on particularly what they call verticals. So it could be providing services to connected cars, it could be sports and entertainment, so services for stadiums and, I don't know, virtual reality, esports. Some that are orienting towards manufacturing and talking about connected factories and Industry 4.0 for, I don't know, manufacturing of cars or machinery. And the telcos are looking to see if they can play additional roles in those areas. But I think the challenge is going to be that a lot of operators want to do everything, but don't have the resources to do it, or the internal agility, and also not necessarily always the support of their investors or regulators as well. So I think you'll see a very different story play out if you're, I don't know, a customer of China Mobile or AT&T versus one of the smaller European operators and certainly a developing market operator. I don't underestimate the challenges for the telecoms industry, but I also think that there needs to be more of a mentality around innovation. Most of them don't have a proper R&D budget. In-house software development, less reliance on a handful of big vendors sort of selling each of them the same equipment, and more willingness to perhaps move away from some of the standards towards almost more of a web-based approach, although that then comes into the constraints of things like privacy and security as well.
There really are so many big talking points around this. And speaking of which, I mean, I think I'm right in saying in December you're running a small group interactive workshop in London. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Who's attending and what you're going to achieve with that?
Right. I mean, that's something I do occasionally, which is run a sort of almost like a sort of, I suppose, half seminar, but half sort of a group in a room where we basically thrash out problems to which there are no real answers yet, but we are trying to get people from different backgrounds. And this particular one I'm doing is looking at what does 5G mean for the wholesale part of the telecoms industry, and especially what get called mobile virtual network operators, or MVNOs. So companies like Virgin in the UK and Sky, and a number in the US and Germany and elsewhere around the world are, if you like, brands which resell capacity. They don't own their own radio spectrum or radio network, but with varying levels of sophistication, they rebadge other companies' products. So some are very, very sophisticated, like Google's Project Fi in the US, which uses multiple different operator networks and blends them together for a single experience. And what's not clear is how they will have to evolve in a 5G world. What impacts both the upsides of 5G in terms of speed and capacity mean for them, but also there's some fundamental changes in the technology and also that regulatory environment, which might mean that existing virtual operators need to change their business models to deal with some sort of innovations. There's a particular thing called network slicing, which is not obvious to me how that interacts with the world of MVNOs. We might also see from a big telco point of view that they need to change their wholesale business models. Most operators focus their attention on selling to consumers or directly to businesses, which is pretty much data packages and phones and so on. But they also have a wholesale arm which sells to other types of service provider. And I'll be honest with you, for the most part, they're relatively small and underdeveloped operations, the wholesale business. Not the most responsive, not the most flexible to their wholesale customer demands. And I think that's going to need to change. And that's one of the strategic levers for telcos to retain relevance in future, is recognizing that they can't be retail suppliers to every industry, to every consumer demographic. They will have to work with external partners. But I don't think they're necessarily geared up to do that. They often view those wholesale customers as more as competitors in the retail space rather than true customers. And I think that there's a lot of scope for changing their philosophy there.
Now, I don't want to trigger you here, but we are reaching that time of the year where the dreaded list tech articles start appearing. So we have the biggest tech trends of 2018, and people will be staring into crystal balls on what the biggest tech trends of 2019 will be. But for many people, 2018 will be remembered as the year where a company could rebrand by simply just putting blockchain in their title and increase their share price as a result. But I get the feeling that we're finally moving away from developers just selling a vision and based on future promises alone. And it's finally becoming about real-world adoption and real-world use cases. But what are your thoughts about the future of blockchain and what it will mean for businesses moving forward?
Right. Well, I'd say on blockchain, there are two very distinct arms. There is the public blockchain side, which is where you have a lot of the discussion, indeed hype around cryptocurrencies and tokens. The idea that there is essentially a separate marketplace in, it could be anything from financial exchange, which is what Bitcoin has started with, through to almost like having currencies for each commodity. It could be electricity supply, it could be computer storage, which is decentralized, and they each come with their own sort of instrument attached to it. That has taken a bit of battering this year, partly for regulatory reasons, and partly just because the systems and solutions were proving harder to develop and commercialize than many thought. I mean, I don't particularly want to have an online wallet with 100 different cryptocurrencies to buy, separately my compute resource and my beer and my flights and everything else. And at the same time, I don't really want to have, and neither does the government, everything paid for in Bitcoin or Ethereum either. So I think that there's a bit of on the public blockchain side, which is usually cryptocurrency, there's been a real sort of step back, reassessment, perhaps some thought about the regulatory compliance as well. And that might start to pick up again in 2019, but I think it's, there's still a lot to prove, particularly in terms of getting the mass market of users, of individuals who've never traded cryptocurrencies on board. On the other side of blockchain is this sort of private, what are called private or permissioned blockchains, which to be honest is more of just a different approach to creating databases for companies or consortia or value chains. And that's something where there's an increasing amount of interest, but also a fair amount of hype. I mean, ultimately, there's a lot of database technologies out there, and blockchain comes with both positives and negatives in all its various guises. And it's worth saying that blockchain is a subset of what are actually called distributed ledgers. I think there's some very interesting projects for things like sort of multi-party value chains where there is not trust between the different parties. So, for example, if you've got a number of trading organizations or a supply chain where you're shipping goods from country A to country B, and it has to go via a shipping company and multiple warehouses and regulatory inspections and trade finance. There's about 15 different organizations in the chain, which at the moment are very slow and clunky at transferring information between each other. If there's a way of having a decentralized information storage and transmission mechanism, which takes out some of that friction, then it makes a lot of sense, as long as it fits with regulation as well. So I think that's interesting. On the telecom side of blockchain, I've done a lot of work looking at telecoms use cases, and some of the more mundane ones are likely to happen first. It could be a database for number portability records is being explored. Another one which I've seen recently is just the payments that the different telcos have to make to each other at the end of each month of, I sent this much data or these many minutes to you and you sent this to me. How do we reconcile that? And ideally you want to have all that done in an automated way without having a team of lawyers on call for dispute management. And if you can sort of simplify that existing clunky process, then that's a quick win. The more sophisticated approaches are going to be where we actually start trying to create new forms of network connectivity. I'm working with a company that's doing incentivized mesh networks, for example, which is got an interesting set of potential, but is non-trivial to get deployed in reality. So I think that 2019 we're going to see more large-scale trials, more early deployments, specific use cases, and there's probably a couple of sort of quasi Googles and Amazons that back in 1997, but we just haven't spotted them yet. There's an awful lot of others that are 1999 era web companies which disappear without trace, and trying to find the wheat amongst the chaff is going to be a tough one.
Now, when I was looking at your Twitter feed before I spoke to you today, I saw a line on there, disruptive before disruption went mainstream. That's how you describe yourself, which is a fantastic soundbite. So I've got to ask, what excites you about the future and the role of technology? Is there anything that concerns you or excites you out there?
Well, excites, absolutely. There's such a lot of interesting stuff going on. I was listening to people talk about connected vehicles and Internet of Things in agriculture, and ability to really optimize the way the world uses its resources without necessarily changing people's behavior too much. I think from an environmental point of view, the more we can do, which essentially enables people to sort of carry on living their lives in a more efficient, cleaner, more sustainable way. It's a lot easier if you can change stuff behind the scenes than trying to force behavior change on people. Sometimes behaviors will change, but it's a lot easier to improve what we've got already. I think that on a more concrete level, the stuff that excites me is probably around, and also concerns me, some of the stuff around AI. And I think that AI has the potential to sort of smooth a lot of what we do. I also think that there's an awful lot of scope for both wrongdoers deliberately, but also accidentally. I'm a big believer that in most cases when things go wrong, it's usually incompetence rather than malice. And I think that we will probably have over enthusiasm about AI. So we'll have suggestions from our applications or the web, which make us cringe. It's, you'll say, I see that you're in this part of area of town. There's a really good cocktail bar that I can recommend. But in fact, you're in that part of town to go to sort of visit a relative in hospital or something, and the system doesn't know about it. So I think there's going to be a sort of a set of risks of whether it's awkwardness or where you get a suggestion which ends up costing you more money, even though the system thinks it's being helpful, or inadvertently causes problems of other sorts, as well as all the privacy risks and security risks. But I also think that there's a huge amount to sort of optimize about the world. I think for industry in particular, things like preventative maintenance. I remember seeing a stat recently which suggested that essentially if you could fix things before they break rather than after, you could probably improve the world economy by some very, very large number almost overnight. I think things like that, where you have pattern recognition from AI, able to stop incipient issues with a piece of machinery or a vehicle or a transport system, I think that would be highly valuable. I think one of the things that concerns me, though, is around hype. I spend a lot of my time trying to diffuse hype. Everyone talks about the hype cycle, which one of my competitors coined. It's a very clever concept, but one of the things I'd like to do is to try to flatten that by predicting what might go wrong or which might go right that no one spotted in advance, rather than having to learn the same lessons time and time again of hyping a new technology and then going, oh, we forgot about this, we didn't realize that. When actually, if you've been listening, those problems someone was talking about, and you could have been fixing them up front rather than discovering them later and slowing the whole process down. So I think there's a little bit more awareness of potential future scenarios that aren't rosy is good. Doesn't mean you have to be a contrarian or always look on the dark side all the time, but at least consider and identify problems and make sure that they're manageable when they crop up. And the other thing is there's a lot of people who tend to think in silos. They have their own view of the world, and they're not aware of what's happening adjacent to them or how that piece of technology or that service or that function fits into a bigger picture. So we started off this call talking about voice search. And for me, voice search and how we interact with a brand or a company is part of a bigger problem of what is the overall customer experience management or customer relationship, of which voice is just one strand. And getting people to sort of talk across those strands more regularly, I think, is a really difficult task to solve, but one that's important.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Well, a huge thank you for coming on and joining me today. Before I do let you go, could you just remind the listeners of where they can find you online, find out more details about your workshop in December, or just reach out and contact you if you've got any questions after our conversation today?
Sure, thanks, Neil. The best ways to reach me are probably via LinkedIn. So that's Dean Bubley, Bubley. And if you sort of add me as a contact, please mention this podcast, or as Disruptive Dean on Twitter. And there's also a outline of the MVNO and 5G event, the workshop, on my blog, which is at disruptivewireless.blogspot.com. Disruptive Wireless is one word. But say LinkedIn and Twitter are probably my most frequently used avenues these days.
Excellent. Well, I'll add those links to the show notes just so people can find you nice and easily. Now, one thing that I think we've all experienced is those tech headlines that we see on all social media and the usual websites around one size fits all. Everything is black or white. It's good or it's bad. But life is so much more complex than that. Listening to you today, I quickly learned that tech solutions have multiple use cases. And what I've enjoyed is just taking a step back, diffusing the hype and removing all those silos, looking at how our lives and our business is evolving and essentially the role of technology in that. So a big thank you for coming on today.
Thank you as well. Thank you very much, Neil.
If you have scrolled down your Facebook feed lately and seen the same 3 statuses from those friends that you're not that keen on every single day, you know that AI capabilities are still in their infancy. And if you look at LinkedIn and you see the algorithm gives you the content that you don't like, but silences your favourite contacts and your favourite thought leaders, something just isn't working right. But that's just because this tech is in its infancy. And we're now at a time where we must brace ourselves for the inevitable top tech trends of 2018 lists and tech predictions for 2019. And what I loved about chatting with Dean was removing that hype, the art of the possible and the crystal ball gazing, and understanding real use cases, real adoption, real problems, and how tech can bring value to business. This is the sweet spot right there, and I cannot thank Dean enough for coming on and being that voice of reason in a tech-obsessed world. But enough of me rambling. Dean came on the show today after I offered my virtual mic out there to everyone listening, and he reached out to me after my interview with Splice. So if you disagree with anything I have said or Dean have said, or you have a different vantage point, I want to hear it. So let's bust down those silos and try to understand the global tech landscape together and not just see the world via that TV set in our home, the outlook in our town, our job role and workplace, our own business or our own industry or even country. So I'm holding out that virtual mic for each and every single person listening to this show. I want you to step up and make your voice and your opinion heard, because I know no matter what industry you work in, you've got incredibly valuable insights. So let's hear them. And you can share those with me by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, pop by my website, techblogwriter.co.uk/podcasts, and you can leave me a virtual voicemail, or just let me know if you want to come on the show. And also, remember, if you need my help editing and producing podcasts or writing blog posts, you know where I am. And if you're thinking of signing up to Libsyn and hosting your own podcast, remember to use the code TBW for the rest of the month free and next month too. But I'm afraid we're out of time today, so a big thank you for Dean coming on the show and diffusing the tech hype for each and every one of you listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.